So we are going to record this today. It is 5:30, so just wanted to say, if you're just coming home from work, if you have snacks, food, things that you've got to take care of, we definitely understand that. So please feel free to take care of things as you need as we get started today. We do have just over 40 people registered, and so I fully anticipate that we might have more people joining us, as we are seeing right now as people roll in. If you could, please put your name and just where you live, work, or play within the region into the chat pod. That would be really helpful. Hey, Devin, how are you?
Hello, doing all right. How are you guys?
Oh, doing well. The rain stopped at my house at least, so can't be too upset about it.
Yeah, well, that's good.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Let me see here. Okay, perfect. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. And if you haven't already, please put your name and then just where you are calling in from, or your relationship to Region 7 in the chat pod. That would be great. Go ahead and pull this up. There we go. I'm also going to admit somebody else into the room. Welcome, Blake. Thank you for joining us today. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started, everybody. If Google Slides will load for us, there we go. All right, so welcome to the Community Water Ops or Water Opportunities Workshop. So we are here today. My name is Rachel Sanderson. I work at Capital Region Planning Commission as the Region 7 Watershed Coordinator. There are 7 other people with my same position across the state, so I am one of a community of individuals. There were a lot of folks who did a lot of work ahead of today's meeting, and so just want to give a big shout out. We do have some folks who are with us today who are going to be helping us facilitators. So we have Anita Tillman, who will be joining us shortly. We have Evelyn Campo, who's with the state's Office of Community Development, Drew Ratcliffe, who's with Capital Region Planning Commission. We also have Ben Wicker, who's also with OCD. And then we also have Kim Marasek, who is also with CRPC as well. So just big thanks to y'all for being here with us today. Depending on how many people we have, you might see that folks actually on the facilitation team drop off. So we might give them some of their evenings back. So just in case you see people missing, that is why it's intentional. So if you haven't already, please put your name and then where you live at or where you work at within Region 7 within the chat pod. We really love to hear that. And if you also want to state one thing that you love about where you live, we love to hear that as well. So just as a reminder, we are recording this meeting today so that we can share it with other folks. We are going to be taking notes today. Those will also be posted online as well. So our agenda for today, as always, we go through introductions and meeting logistics just to get everybody on the same page for the discussion. We will then go into an overview of the Watershed Initiative and the Region 7 Provisional Governance Recommendation. And then we're going to spend about 45 minutes in breakout groups. So whenever Ivy said you're here to learn, that is why I said we're here to learn from you, because the largest chunk of time that we'll spend together today is actually listening to folks on this call. And we definitely have our facilitators prepared to be able to actively listen. So we wanted to start off by talking first about the last few days. It's been a really hard week for a lot of people, I think. And also, going into the morning of the 17th, what you're looking at here is actually a product that's issued through NOAA, so one of their sub-entities. We did know that we had a moderate risk for excessive rainfall that day. So we've had a moderate risk for excessive rainfall before. We've had it a couple other days this week as well. And so a moderate risk is pretty significant. It's a level 3 out of 4 when we talk about rainfall. So we anticipated that there would be some impacts, but with these rainfall events, it's really hard to tell exactly where the rainfall is going to fall because you're predicting the weather, you're predicting the future, right? If we could all be really good at predicting things, we would probably always win our March Madness brackets, for example, right? Or we'd be able to predict who's going to be at the Super Bowl every single year, but things are unpredictable, so we don't always know that. The exact same system actually led to pretty similar impacts across Lake Charles, Lafayette, as well as the Baton Rouge area. if I didn't put labels on any one of these, you could have made an assumption that they might have been in any of those communities. The only one that might give it away is Baton Rouge because it happened at night, right? And so we can see that was the exact same system. So I think a lot of the times we think about, whenever at least I think about regional work, one of the ways that I'm shifting my thinking is that we're not only connected by our topography, by the earth, so really thinking about the water that we actually share with one another, but we're also connected through the air. So this exact same system caused similar rainfall totals in Lake Charles, Lafayette, and Baton Rouge that then went into our riverine systems and created some pretty significant impacts. So this shows the white on this map, that's going to be 10 inches. NOAA has had conversations about if they should increase their scale or not, because we had more than 10 inches of rain, in some cases more than 15 in some locations. So you'll see that those hotspots are across the map here. And so really, I wanted to kind of set up this question for folks to come off mute, because I want to hear from folks on this call, what are some changes that you've seen around you in the last 10 years? You know, is what happened on Monday and Tuesday, is that normal? What changes have you seen? So feel free to come off mute. You can also use the chat pod.
I'll go. Honora Burris, I'm in Ascension Parish in Prairieville, so I think most people would probably know I've seen a lot of changes in the last 10 years. The biggest one has been all of the development and the fill, both in Ascension and in Southeast Baton Rouge, especially along Burbank, and that's why I'm flooded today. So I'm on high ground. I moved here in 1980. Was over by Bayou Manchac for the 83 flood. This area didn't flood then. We've had this level of flooding 3 times in the last 10 years. It's not normal.
Yeah, thanks, Honora, for the perspective, and just also want to recognize your comparison of 83. I think that's invaluable information as well. Does anybody else want to talk a little bit about some changes that they've seen? And it doesn't have to be the last 10 years. It could be the last 7, the last 5, just recently. So I think I did read something today where one of the, I think it might have been the chief meteorologist out of National Weather Service in Slidell, and he was saying that this is the 5th wettest April on record. So since we started keeping records in 1871. Does anybody else think we've been getting more rain?
For sure.
Yeah, thanks, Faith.
I was actually just telling my my grandfather earlier today how normally May we would start seeing drier weather, and how I expected it from April, all the rain, but how this feels like a repeat of April, and I was very confused.
We have a weather station out here in New Orleans, and I was looking at some data the other day, and we've already gotten almost 40 inches of rain. And our yearly is supposed to be 64, and we're about halfway through. So I think we definitely are getting more rain.
Thanks, Faith. And I know Delaney, you just spoke up as well, so I just want to address the two. But Faith, I also appreciate you said that you have these conversations with your grandfather. So I think having that intergenerational perspective and really talking about what has been happening is critical. Delaney, I also hear you. We're already halfway to having what is our normal amount of rain, that's 64 inches. And we're not even fully into hurricane season yet. I think that's something for us to all think about. And Drew, I saw you said Baton Rouge is experiencing the 4th most amount of rain in a spring. I think we're all witnessing and living through that. Does anybody else want to add what changes they've seen? Says the last 10 years, but it could be any time more recent than that too. Thank you, Ivy. You said more hurricanes and tropical storms forming earlier in May and June in the Gulf area. This time last June, you were packing to evacuate. Which is, yeah.
Rachel, I tell you, to make an intelligent conversation here, we should have invited really people that really understand weather, meteorology, that really can give us an answer, because we are talking about experiences. And yes, it's true, things are changing, but we need more than that to really get to understand or try to halfway understand. For example, the rain pattern was kind of a little bit unusual with the concentration of rain felt. That is not the tradition. I'm familiar very much with the Emmett River Basin. And I have looked at the historical events and have a lot of data and information. This is not the classical flood that comes from the north. The rain falls primarily in the upper basin. The crest comes down, creates backwater impacts, and then the local rain exasperates the situation. So really, when we make these discussions, we have to understand all of these dynamics to really understand. And I am not by any means, a weatherman or anybody. We need even more than that when you try to tie it into something what is called warming, earth warming, and what have you. That's just my opinion. We should really if we wanted to discuss this, we need to invite somebody, maybe sometime, and really give us a couple of people and really tell us that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Dietmar. And I actually always usually start off with these conversations with my background. So I have an undergraduate degree in professional meteorology. I was also an on-air meteorologist at WWL for about 6 months. Have very intimate relationships and connections with those folks. I was also a hydrometeorologist intern at the local NOAA Forecast Center as well in 2016. So the forecast for the flood events and the riverine events that we saw in 2016, I actually had a hand in forecasting every single one of those from March through August. And also I think hearing people about what has changed, I think that scientists and professionals have a lot of knowledge and background and information that can tell them about the processes and the systems and why things sometimes work. But I also think that on the ground information and knowledge is invaluable. And I think that sometimes we don't talk about it enough. So really, really appreciate all of the feedback that we got from every single person. You are experts of where you live. You know what has been changing. You know exactly, in some cases, why it has been changing if it is easily identifiable. And we trust your lived experience and knowledge. So in Region 7, and I don't have to tell anybody about this, right? I think everybody knows this, that our region and really the entire state faces multiple flood risks. So we have riverine flooding, so our rivers overflow. We have storm surge flooding, we have high tide flooding, backwater flooding, stormwater and drainage flooding. Really any type of flooding, you name it, we experience it here. And we also know that over time, we're going to actually see increases in the amount of flooding that we're seeing for a couple of different reasons. And the first is that risk is dynamic. It's not static, right? We live in a natural environment that changes often over time. It has changed and it will continue to change. So in the lower left-hand corner, this is actually information and data that is modified from Coastal Protection Restoration Authority's 2017 master plan. That should say OCD because OCD through their consultant work for LA Safe actually modified that. It was a project that I had the privilege to be a part of, and I know that there are other folks on this call who were part of that project as well. And it's also originally data that's from USGS. That first map is OCD, so that actually shows flood risk today. you'll see over time that because of land loss as well as sea level rise, that darker blue, which is deeper water, actually encroaches on our communities that are further inland over time. So this is only accounting for coastal flood risk over time because of a 100-year flood event. And that is actually through 2050 or 2067. So 50 years into the future from that 2017 master plan. On the right-hand side of the page, you'll actually notice that this is a flood factor distribution of properties. So there's a website called floodfactor.com. You can type in your address and it will tell you what your level of flood risk is over the next 30 years. I will say with both of these different maps, right? These are predictions again. So if we could predict the future accurately, we would be in very different situations. So just know that they are predictions, but every single red, orange, or maroon or yellow colored dot that you see on that map specifically, that's actually a property or thousands of properties that could be at risk or are at risk of flooding over the next 30 years across Louisiana. So we are certainly not without risk, which means we are also not without opportunity within the state as well. And so why are we experiencing these changes? These are information, this is information specifically from Flood Factor. And so these are environmental changes today, and then we'll go to the next slide, and it'll be in 15 years. But we know that we're seeing more rain than we used to. That's normal. So as we think about things getting warmer over time, essentially, if you think about the atmosphere as a bucket, if you could put all the atmosphere into a bucket, that the warmer the air gets, the more moisture it can hold. So we used to have a 5-gallon bucket, now we have 10-gallon bucket. So the warmer the air is, the more moisture it can hold. That's a really simple way of explaining that. You'll notice on, let me move this taskbar out of the way. These are sea level rise indicators in inches. So places with the highest sea level rise in inches, these are actually from longstanding NOAA gauges. So federally instituted gauges that are through a gauge network through NOAA. It's 14.4 feet at Grand Isle and then 10.3 at Galveston Pier. Sorry, that's in inches. Yeah, so 14.4 inches and then 10.3 inches. That's the change that has occurred. And then the seas are also getting warmer as well. So in 15 years from now, what does that mean? That means that Southeast is getting wetter. That also means that we went from 14.4 inches at the long-term gauge in Grand Isle, Louisiana to 19.8. That's vertical increase. I think that also, that's vertical increase. And then also we're anticipating that our seas get even warmer, which means that we can have more moisture in the atmosphere. We also know that that's really right conditions for tropical systems as well. And so risk also changes because we as people change the environment. We need to build things, right? We have to have places to live. We have to have places to shop. We really have to have places for public goods and services. So think about public libraries, schools, things of that nature. And also living in a place like Louisiana, that means that we have more concrete, which means there's less storage for floodwater. And Louisiana is really flat, and so our floodplains are wide. So whenever we put in more concrete, that actually means that we're expanding the area where the water can flow to. And these are just kind of the simple ways that I think about some of this in conversation with people. So this is Hammond area in 2003. And over time, you'll notice that the little green spaces that are on here turn brown, white, off-white in color, tan. So this is 2008, this is 2013, and this is 2016. And so you really see this development over time. And we also know that the impacts of different storm events are felt differently across different communities, across different families. It's almost on a household to household basis. And so we have two scenarios here. So family A, they're an elderly couple, they're on fixed income, they're differently abled, and they don't have flood insurance. So let's pretend both of these families flooded earlier this week, and it's a year from now. So we're in 2022, and family A, they're living in a partially rebuilt house. They actually had to take on additional debt, and their structure still doesn't meet their accessibility needs. Family B is dual income with no children. They had flood insurance, and their job actually provided leave for recovery. And then a year post-event, so flash forward to 2022, and they had their home rebuilt within 6 months. They were able to get back to normal, and they were able to navigate the administrative and legal systems to be able to receive full benefits. And so we just want to recognize also that different communities, different families face different challenges whenever it comes to rebuilding over time. It's not an equal recovery, if you will. We spend a lot of time talking about the challenge. So in short, really It's just that flooding doesn't follow political boundaries, just like our storm systems that drop the rain do not either, right? The air and the earth are not connected or do not listen to the boundaries that we have in place. They cross parish and state lines. Inactions in one community can impact entire ecosystems, just like impacts from one ecosystem or one event can impact multiple communities. So the opportunity for us through the Watershed Initiative is to be able to fundamentally change how we address flood risk reduction over time. And this is by creating a regional watershed-based approach to floodplain management. So what is a watershed? I don't know if maybe I can call on somebody like Honora or Ivy or Devin, if you just want to tell me really quickly in your own words what you think a watershed is. And you're not going to be wrong.
I guess I could take a stab at it. So I like that graphic that you have there. A watershed can be at many different scales from what I understand. But it's basically an area of land that has boundaries, and within those boundaries, water flows from those boundaries into the lowest point or a common outlet. And so that can be as big as the piece of land that you have in that graphic, or it can be sometimes as small as like a neighborhood or even a street. So that's my understanding.
That's spot on, Devin. Thank you. Really appreciate that. And let me see, we had a question in the chat pod. So from Jonathan Leo, you asked, are any of Louisiana's 18 indigenous tribes located in Region 7? And if so, do you know which ones? So Jonathan, I have looked up specifically if there are indigenous nations that are either state or federally recognized in the region. None of them have offices or council offices within the region. In saying that, I also know that does not mean that they're not indigenous folks who are a part of those nations who live within the region. So if you have additional information for maybe who we could reach out to be able to better tap into those groups, or maybe it actually just looks like having conversations with those existing tribes to see what their affiliations are with the region, but I'd love to hear if you've got thoughts.
I am working with Chief Shirel Parfait Dardar of the Biloxi Chitimacha Choctaw tribe. She is not much, but further south, I believe, southeast of Region 7. Her home, I know, is in Chauvin, I forget how it's pronounced here. But I'm working with her on a climate initiative task force matter. I was thinking about asking her before this Zoom call, but I didn't have a chance to. So that's the reason that I put my question in the chat box. But I plan to ask her if she knows any indigenous people, whether there's a tribal headquarters or not in this region, just because I think, keying off of what you said at the beginning when I came on late, Rachel, that people who live here and see things on the ground over seasons and over years in and out have live a reality and an understanding of climate that is of a different kind than a scientist's, but no less valid. And so that's what I was thinking about.
Whenever, in a minute, I don't know.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thank you. And I also know Chief Sherrill, so if she wants to have a conversation, just let me know. That's a really great point too, Honora. Not all of our tribes are state or federally recognized. So if we got some folks on the ground who can help us make connections, please let us know. Anita, you had your hand raised and then you put it down. Did you have something you wanted to?
No, I just wanted to, because we also have a listing of all the tribes, and that was the one that I couldn't get any contact information on. So if you guys, we can share that in the chat or after the fact, just to make sure that we're making contact with them as well.
Thanks, Anita. Okay, well, for the sake of time, we're gonna move on here. So the LWI Louisiana Watershed Initiative mission is to reduce flood risk, improve floodplain management throughout the state, and maximize the natural and beneficial functions of floodplains. And then Region 7, through a community workshop that we had that was virtual last August, so almost a year ago now, we actually laid out our vision for the region. So we envision a future with less flood risk, healthier natural environments, and resilience practices that are responsive to the needs of our communities and to our evolving environment. And within the guiding principles framework, which I can put in the chat pod here, it actually has more specific items laid out within that. So specifically laying out what that vision looks like in action. So I'll go ahead and put that in the chat pod for everybody as well. Here we go. And we also have some goals that are listed within that framework as well. I'll just call out a couple of them for the sake of time, and you can look at them on that guiding principles framework. But the first is equitable flood risk reduction. So specifically thinking about climate and environmental equity, thinking about a strategy that is beyond political terms. And then we also have those goals further broken down in the guiding principles framework. And so guiding principles for the entire effort, those are going to be scientific tools, using the best available scientific tools, approaches, best practices within the work, being transparent and objective about our decision-making, maximizing the natural function of floodplains, and then also focusing on regional watershed management. So the Louisiana Watershed Initiative is, we've talked a lot about the regional work, but that regional work was stood up because essentially whenever this work started through executive order, Governor John Bell Edwards asked these 5 state agencies, so CPRA, Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, Department of Transportation and Development, and Louisiana's Office of Community Development to come together because they all have some role in floodplain mitigation across the state. And he said, hey, we need y'all to think about programmatic as well as policy alignment because we cannot continue to experience the level of flooding that we're experiencing today. It's really hard on our folks who live here, on Louisianans. It's really hard on our economy. We can't keep living like this. As a part of that work, there was a phase 1 report that was put out that actually recommended that because most of our planning and development decisions are made at the local level, that there should be regional entities that helped with consistency across those different entities and jurisdictions. Which is exactly why we are now in this phase where we are building out a regional governance structure. So what you'll see on this is just kind of a pathways document to explain how we got to the point where we're at today, which is with this draft provisional governance recommendation, which I will also put in the chat pod momentarily. But essentially what we did was we started off with that values, vision, and goals workshop that I just mentioned to y'all. And from that, we then started to talk about challenges and opportunities because sometimes I think I like to call these pickle-tunities. So we are in quite a pickle, but that also means that we have an opportunity to be able to work with. So we have a lot of pickle-tunities that have been made pretty apparent for us. We also considered the 4 R's, which is a model that Dr. Thomas Douthit with LSU has been working with us on. He's been really fantastic and supportive of this work. So those are rules, roles, responsibilities, and reporting as it relates to the eventual development of a governance structure. We then looked at a couple of different governance models and we're able to put together a provisional recommendation. The provisional recommendation is quite vague. It was adopted in late January by the steering committee, which is a group that's composed of, at that time, it was 17 individuals, so 4 regional representatives and then 1 representative per parish. But it's meant to be vague because we're at this feedback point. We wanted to leave room for feedback to hear specific things from folks about what they think this work needs to look like across the region. After that, we will discuss and incorporate all of the feedback that we've been hearing. And then we have to have a final recommendation prepared for the end of June, so very soon. So within these recommendations, it lays out the potential roles and responsibilities, authorities, composition, who facilitates that group. So who staffs it is really what that means. And then the process for implementing on that recommendation. And so we'll go over these quickly and please feel free to ask questions, but also in the breakout groups, that's also an opportunity to ask questions and to have discussion too. So don't feel like you have to respond in this moment. So in terms of planning guidance for roles and responsibilities, really what we heard from folks was the need to be able to provide technical assistance to local entities. So from municipalities to parishes to be able to provide support around technical data information, modeling, being able to coordinate across jurisdictions. We also heard that the state should adopt minimum development standards. So one example that we've heard is a photo freeboard, because now for the community rating system, which is how you get essentially money back for folks who have insurance premiums, you have to have at least a photo freeboard to qualify for a certain class rating. And basically, the lower the number on your class rating for that, the bigger the reductions in flood insurance that people will see on their premiums. And also that we should be providing local assistance with regards to development standards. For projects, this says review and or provide technical assistance on major projects. When we say review here, we don't mean the traditional thumbs up or thumbs down, right? We understand that it takes a long time already to get projects implemented. We really mean review in the sense of being able to review for consistency. So making sure that those projects are going to be in alignment with the regional vision, and also looking for upstream, downstream impacts. In terms of data and modeling, the group recommends that the models are initially housed at the state level, but that over time, with support, capacity should be built at the regional level. And really talked about the idea of having a liaison to be able to work between local jurisdictions, the region, and then the state. For outreach and engagement, I think we hear a lot about this from the steering committee, as well as other folks that we've had conversations with. Really everything from being able to provide conversations and discussions like this to train the trainer programs, where CRPC as the coordinating entity, we don't want to be a brain drain. We want to be able to build capacity across the region so that folks can be trained up to be able to train others within this work. And then also really thinking about how we tap into people's lived experience and knowledge in ways that honors that, and then also making sure that what we are doing is adding to that instead of taking away from. In terms of the coalition composition, so the eventual body, we have the steering committee right now, which will transition as this document is put together, as things are finalized over time, to be a mix of public elected officials or their appointees, private representatives, citizens, or organizations outside of government. So again, it's wide open. We would love to hear people's feedback on this today too. It was recommended that Capital Region Planning Commission, who has been coordinating Region 7 up to this point, so for a year now, continues to do so. So we're not creating a new entity. We are leaning into our existing regional entities as they're already created or developed. And for authorities, really everything that we just talked about in terms of those regional activities, it's just saying that we have the authority to be able to do those things. So to be able to provide technical assistance, to be able to cooperate or contract with other agencies, to oversee regional planning processes, because one of the things through the watershed initiative that is pretty key is creating a regional watershed plan. So being able to coordinate those activities essentially, being able to provide support for technical assistance related to outreach and engagement as well. And then also to be able to receive money from various sources and also to be able to distribute it. So implementing on that, the recommendation from the steering committee was to have it be enabled by legislation under a state agency, board, or commission, and that all of the different coalitions, because there's 8 regions across the state, should be enabled under a single charter. Those boundaries should be approved by state board or program, and also there should be a state agency to be able to provide guidance or oversight for the purpose of consistency. So that was a lot.
Rachel, can I make a comment before we go into groups?
Sure.
I wanted to make everybody clear that we have an issue on governance, the Immediate River Basin Commission. Maybe some of the people right now here listening never heard this or was not in some of the meetings. Our objections, particular in this basin, not the watershed initiative as a whole. It's a wonderful thing. I think we have been preaching watershed for 20 years ourselves, but particularly on the governance, we have issues. The reason is very simple. The Immediate River Basin Commission, established by state law, revised statutes, whatever, have authorities. We have authorities in this basin basically. And so we have been questioning how these two authorities, this authority does not exist yet. And we have some issues about which authority is going to govern and how is it going to interrelate. So we have really issues, particularly the ward's review.
Join the meeting.
And the ward authority, especially in terms of governance, because we got already statutes and that needs to be addressed at some point in time. This is a particular situation in the state of Louisiana with us, the Mid River Basin. I just want to make that understand we're not against the concept, but on the other hand, I don't know what our relationship is going to be, the Mid River Basin Commission and whoever is going to be managing Region 7, it be CRPC or whoever. Apparently it's going to be the Capital Region Planning Commission. And so we have been sounding that for a long time, because we would like to get that issue addressed before all of this is really wrapped up. That's all what I have to say.
Thanks, Tamar. Really appreciate that feedback. And I know that's certainly something that is a valid point. It's something that we think about at CRPC. I think it's something that we've been talking about and thinking about with OCD. And so really trying to navigate what that looks like is something that we've been discussing. So for breakout groups, we are going to have about 45 minutes in a breakout group. Each group has a facilitator who's going to take notes. There are some key questions to help guide the discussion. And we're also going to do a key takeaways report at the end of the discussion as well. So I'm just kind of splitting up some of our folks in the breakout groups. Let me see, just to make sure we kind of have a more even number, if you will. Here we go. Okay, so we're going to go into breakout groups. Everybody should kind of be forced into those. If not, you'll see a little icon on your screen that says join breakout group or join session. So have fun. I'm going to be popping in and out of each of those breakout groups. So if you got any questions, also feel free to get me while I'm in the room.
Watching those. So there we go.
Yeah. Go ahead and put the video on too.
All right, so we have Rachel, you're on with us now. Is this everybody?
Yeah, y'all are good to go. I'm
Hey,
just gonna pop in and out. Hey, Nora.
Okay,
So nice to see you.
good. Just wanted to make sure.
And hi, Ivy. Put your camera on, Ivy. Hadn't seen you in ages.
Oh, the shock effect.
You can't look any worse than I do. I look like a drowned rat. So,
And we do have a quick side note. We do have to play catch up. Says I heard your
Yeah.
good news about retiring.
soon, hopefully.
Well, my fingers are crossed for you.
Well, good. Well, we're gonna just kick off, start about 5 minutes. Just everybody's gonna have an introduction. And then I'm just gonna go across my screen and let you say a little bit about yourself, maybe who you're representing and where you live. I'm Drew Ratcliffe. I'm with CRPC. I've been with CRPC for the past, since 2017, 3 or 4 years now. I started after the flood of 2016, and I'm now working in my main focus is on transportation and freight resilience. But prior to the watershed initiative taking off, I was doing a lot of work and helping kind of set the stage for this initiative before we hired Rachel. And pass the baton to a much more worthy person than I to lead this initiative. And I mentioned earlier, I live in Baton Rouge, maybe less than a half a mile from Bayou Fountain. Luckily, I'm on the high side of Highland Road, but Monday night was still pretty scary. Enough rain dropped to turn my street into a river, more than I've ever seen. So I'm gonna turn it over to Honora. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself, where you live.
I live in Prairieville. I come from a long line of people who care about the environment and understand where water flows. My father worked for the U.S. Geological Survey for his entire career. He was trained as a civil engineer, but worked as a hydrologist in the Baton Rouge USGS office, water office. And so I grew up hearing my dad's stories of flooding and measuring floods and all of his fun and games with the Corps of Engineers over the years. And I grew up on the high side of Highland Road also, Highland Park Drive, right next to Kenilworth. My dad, when he bought that house in 1956, it was out in the middle of nowhere, but he said he wasn't about to build in Broadmoor, which was a drained swamp. He knew better. He said, I'm higher than the Mississippi River levee and I will not flood. And so there were many, I watched that whole area as it developed growing up. And all the low side of Highland Road was definitely off limits. All along Bayou Fountain was definitely off limits for development. And they didn't do it. They didn't. People developed on the high ground for the most part. You had some scattered places that we had the bottoms, which was the Old South Baton Rouge, they call it now, which was where the Black families lived, and they flooded, but that was redlining. They didn't really have a lot of choices, so that's something to consider. But I studied horticulture, and I ended up moving out to Prairieville, and I moved out there to manage a nursery selling native plants. And I moved out there in 1980. And I lived just off of Bayou Manchac on Muddy Creek Road, but on the high ground. I always lived on the high ground, the highest house. And I was there for the 83 flood. And I watched everybody, all the new development that just barely flooded, but the guy across the street had been there for the previous flood and built a slab on grade house, which was stupid. And I saw that as like, what is he doing? So anyway, I wanted to buy property out here in Prairieville and make it my home. And I saw what flooded in 83. And it was a typical 100-year flood, if you can call anything typical. It exactly flooded where the 100-year floodplain map said it would flood. And I think it was generally acknowledged that that was a 100-year flood. So when I bought my property, it has high ground and low ground, and it has a little stream that connects under the interstate down into Bluff Swamp, which is the source of my issues. But I'm on high ground, 22 feet elevation. I'm on that same Highland Road levee ridge, natural ridge. First time my father came out here when we bought it, he stopped on the little bridge crossing the creek and looked up in the tree. I said, what you looking for, squirrels or what? And he said, no, I'm looking for the high water marks. And I said, well, I'm up on the hill. I'm above that. And I also, as a biologist and botanist, I know you look where the live oaks are. There's a nice big live oak, several 100-year-old live oak right next to it. And I bought the property with a house that was built in 1910, the highest ground around. So I knew I was safe. But then in all the years since then, the parish has given in to every single developer that wants to build anything on the lowest ground possible, let them fill in everywhere. And they kept raising the standards of how high everybody had to build to be out of the 100-year flood zone, but they were allowed to fill in. And then they were flooding the people who were on the high ground when they built. And the same thing started happening in Baton Rouge. All that area along Burbank, out there off O'Neill, that flooded in 83. And they said, oops, we're not going to develop this. They were just starting to develop it. They said, when Baton Rouge said they weren't going to develop it. Look at it now. Go down Burbank, and they filled in with probably 20 feet of dirt
We just got to have the right people in the room. Another angle is the politics of it, the science and the politics. The science, we got to make sure we've got the right science, the proper science, the real science. The politics, well, this is Louisiana, and a lot of that decision making is based on political decisions and money for somebody else. So, we do have a battle. It's possible, but we have a battle.
Thank y'all so much. That was a really good examination, I think, of both these first two questions. I really appreciate that. That's great, y'all. Before we move on to these next few questions, does anyone want to jump in on that? Is anyone right at the edge of their seat? Okay, well, I'm going to move us along, but we don't have to stick just to the list right here. We can branch off into whatever needs to be discussed. So we talked about kind of 1 and 2. What do we like and what concerns do we have? Let's talk about number 3. How would you like your local government agency to be involved in LWI? And we have an example here. What role should the drainage district where you live or the council where you live take in this program, in this effort?
Evelyn, I'm abstaining from saying because I don't represent a local government agency.
Well, now remember, y'all, this is asking about your local government that represents you, like as a resident,
okay.
or as someone who enjoys that place. So
I see.
Be what you wish they did.
I thought you were asking how do the entities involved in this want their administration involved. You're asking how is a general public do you want your local government engaged?
Exactly. Very well said. Thank you.
I don't know.
Well, let me say, I've talked personally in his office with Fred Rayford, who's has a lot to do with, he used to be over drainage, over DPW for East Baton Rouge Parish. He's got another position now, but he's
he still is.
Still is? Yeah.
Yep.
And he and I are pretty much on the same page. I can speak a lot more freely than he can because he's in politics, but I have confidence in him on wanting us to get this right. And that's a very positive thing from government. But, we just got to make sure we do get the right people in the room and go with facts.
I think I agree. I don't, you asked whether it should be council. Council people are political.
I agree. I think having council members very much involved can really slow down, either maybe not slow down the progress, but just kind of gut the whole mission. I think it's kind of what Blake was getting to earlier about this, like a decision matrix, without bias. And I'm not incredibly familiar with how drainage districts are set up in terms of their governance. So I wouldn't have anything to say about that. But if it does have any kind of political sway, then,
Getting down to the questions, we have, 6:20. We have about 10-15 minutes for this discussion. So tell me what you like about the Louisiana Watershed Initiative and what opportunities do you see? And that's anybody who wants to go with that. Anybody? Nobody likes LWI? Any thoughts about the state's regional approach to managing watersheds? Any thoughts about, regional autonomy in putting it together? Do you think it's a great idea? Are there challenges with it?
Well, let me get started. Looks like I'm the one that has been exposed the most to this. I am 100% for watershed approaches. The Meat River Basin, we are the only agency in the state of Louisiana defined purely by the watershed. And so I believe it's a great approach. That is the way it should be approached no matter what. And so there are some kinks that needs to be worked out. And maybe I'll make that comment at the next question. That what I can mix it, I don't care. And I have expressed this in many times before, that even it might not be too late, it might be too late, is that there should have been in the approach to try to achieve that goal, which is not an easy one. It's not an easy one. Not enough agencies, traditional agencies, were involved in the process. I find this out all the time. I'm finding out people don't know. I also inform them what's going on, and they scratch their head and they say, how come we're not involved? And the problem with that is that we got historically, obviously, like everywhere else, we got good agencies, we got bad agencies, we got levy boards in the state of Louisiana. Some are criticized, some are not. The fact remains that these agencies over the years have done a good job. Could be done better. You can always do it better. In my opinion, that has not been addressed too well, and I think it's going to create some frictions as we move on. Because I am also a believer of using existing resources that work and amalgamate it into the process. That is my personal, that's what I have seen and that is my opinion.
Dietmar, when you say that not enough traditional agencies were involved in the process, are there any specific agencies that you feel like should have been at the table?
Well, one in particular is, I know the levy boards, they did not know nothing about it. So happened that purely by accident, we belong to the Levy Board Association. And I kept telling them about it. And they at the beginning, they didn't know what I was talking about. And they are now late in the process. And everything is being explained to them by the watershed and by Pat Forbes. He came to the group the other day. And then there are many water drainage districts also in the state of Louisiana. Some of them are based on a parish or a portion of a parish. And they have done their job. What I mean by that, between the confines of what they could do, they have done a good job. And so we are very similar in the same boat. When I see the governance, I'm glad I got an attorney here listening to this. When I look at the governance that is being proposed, I see potential friction with our governance. And it's the same thing. I'm just saying these things need to be addressed, discussed, washed, cleaned, and ironed. So, don't say it in those terms, but you know what it presents a problem for this basin in particular, for the Meat River Basin in particular, maybe leave it like that. But I know the other parts of the state that have similar situations. I see the way from a perspective, I'm very familiar with planning too, by the way. They're taking more or less the Watershed Initiative, a planning approach, and that is a good thing. But historically, the projects and programs are funded through state, federal monies primarily. And so those systems exist already. They're not the best in the world. But again, there has to be a linkage to that process to make this process work. I don't know if I'm making sense, but
Dietmar, can I ask you a question about the last thing you just said? Are you concerned that the fact that state and federal funding sources are the principal or perhaps even the only meaningful funding sources for the kinds of initiatives that the watershed initiative is going to be engaged in planning for, that there is a disconnect between those different jurisdictional levels, state and federal on the one hand at the high end, and sub-state and regional on the other hand?
What I'm saying is, for example, I'm very familiar with the Army Corps of Engineers. You're probably familiar too, because from your background, I see that you probably were involved in some of that. And they have a system. They have a way of how to select the projects. We have been structurally oriented for forever. Now we're moving into more floodplain management and this type of things, and they're moving in that direction. But they have their system. For example, in this basin, we got right now two major projects that are kind of on the rails, has to go a long way. But the Army Corps of Engineers has their process. They have their public hearings, they have this, they have that, they have the other, you see? And so that somehow has to be linked into the watershed initiative. It has to be somehow, if it's going to be successful, it has to be linked somewhere into the process. And that is what I see. We got these processes already established, but nobody addressed. We are looking at the watershed initiative as something we're going to impose and everything is going to be beautiful like a garden. It doesn't work that way. You have to look at the landscape. You have to look at what's going on and then incorporate what you into the process, into the planning. They're primarily approaching a planning process.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're doing. But that has to be incorporated into that governance somehow. Even in general terms right now, you don't have to be too specific. But I have not seen it. If you look, I don't know if you have looked at the governance in a particular, in our case here, and it makes suggestions and mentions things. I believe not more needs to be done to really get another thing to pass muster at the legislature. I tell you, when it comes to that time, there's going to be all of these things have to be in place. Is what I'm trying to say.
Anita, I think, and you may have already been doing this with the way that you're incorporating your notes into different categories here. What it strikes me that what Dietmar is talking about is both an opportunity and a concern simultaneously, and it really not one is distinguishable from the other. They're two sides in a sense of the same coin. Yes. I'm not familiar enough. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar enough yet with the genesis of this project to know. But Dietmar's point, from my perspective, is extremely well taken. The UI to identify, I'll call them jurisdictional stakeholders. Any agency at any level of government, from the most local through regional and in state and into federal, even if there's any interstate agency, but certainly up into the federal agencies. What are the agencies like the Army Corps of Engineers that have any kind of jurisdiction, all the way down to levee boards and drainage districts on the local level, that have a jurisdictional role to play in any of the activities that the Watershed Initiative seeks to work on or implement or create, to the extent that there
and most of the engagement, like that's the thing I'm most disheartened and most proud of, is when a kid just, you see the light bulb go off because they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense, that tree's thirsty, all right, let's get more trees in here. So that's my comment.
Feed the trees.
Thanks, y'all. That is just a really interesting conversation there. I'm just looking through what y'all have said. That's really cool. Does anybody want to kind of cap off? Yeah, I love it. I see a comment in the chat. Feed the trees. Love that. Does anyone want to kind of cap off this part of the discussion with just kind of building on some of these ideas of public education and how that kind of filters into the discourse that influences, you know, what our elected leaders decide to do? I am really excited about this next question. I can't wait to hear what y'all say to this. So I'm going to put us on question 4 now. Are there activities taking place outside of government that may already be addressing these concerns? So some really cool examples of groups that are taking on flood risk. I really want to hear about that.
Well, there are some entities that I see do incorporate green infrastructure into their design. I mean, Breck is trying to go in that direction. And then there are some public interest groups that have expressed concern about water quality and have been making people publicly aware of that. At least that's what I've seen in Baton Rouge.
I've heard there's a pretty good podcast that just came out by someone. Yeah.
Yeah, so I have a podcast. It only has 1 episode. It's very specific to New Orleans. So Region 7 really wouldn't be I guess included, but a lot of the things are very similar in terms of the concept of a watershed and things like that. In Baton Rouge, I do know that gosh, what is it called? Baton Rouge Green. They're one of the I guess NGOs or nonprofits that are working to do things like that.
And I see a link in the chat. Is that your podcast there, Devin? Cicada Radio, River Runs Backwards?
That is my podcast. Yeah.
Very cool. Thank you, guys. I mean, that's the question, right? I mean, media is included in this question.
It's a passion.
And I'm sorry,
project.
I missed that last point you made too.
Who, me?
I think you're calling out one more community-oriented group.
Yeah, it was just Baton Rouge Green. I just know they have a lot of programs involved with green infrastructure, nature-based solutions, a lot of tree plantings, and things like that.
You know, one thing that this does bring to mind for me, and I'm curious if y'all have some thoughts on this, is a lot of what we're talking about in this conversation seems to get to whose responsibility is it to deal with some of these issues, right? And sometimes, you know, water management happens on like a huge, you know, geographic scale. Is that something that a nonprofit can even
makes me very happy. So
And just as a little background for y'all, I was with FEMA in the 2016 flood, and you know, it seemed like pretty soon after that August flood, sort of the seeds for this whole idea were kind of bubbling up from the state. Nothing was official, but they were coming. And then about around 2017 or so, they started talking about there was this idea of working together and that there might be federal funding coming. And then you started hearing that was going to be about $500 million. And we didn't really know where it was going to come from. And then all of a sudden in early 2018, I was trying to do a lot of work with OCD and trying to build some regional consensus. And then in 2018, about late 2018, or maybe I think that's right. We hear, nope, it's 1.2 billion and it's HUD CDB DGDR or mitigation money. It's going to be a whole new thing that HUD's doing. So that's kind of where this all came from. It's thinking about spending that pot of 1.2 billion, and that is all. Louisiana has an action plan on OCD's website, as I'm sure y'all might be familiar with. It's well worth your read. It's not an easy read, but the action plan is there, and there's a lot of really useful information in there. I think we got started a little late, so I'm gonna start on the next question, but I do want to reserve some time for us to talk about what we're going to report out. The second question is, what concerns do you have about LWI? And I got already some of those from y'all, but if you wanted to, mentioned, we're putting forth old projects. It might be a little too late to undo some of these things. Lack of plans to preserve green space and habitat. The ask of elected officials to share power and change their thinking, and that this is driven by executive order now. Is there going to be any sort of legislation to kind of entrench what it is we're doing now? So do y'all have anything else that you want to add to that, to what your concerns are?
I guess some of the governance, like Dietmar kind of touched on, it's like the Amy River Basin Commission has been there, and I think they were formed around the time of the '83 flood, and I don't know that they've done much. Now, maybe, I don't know why not. I really have not been engaged in that effort. That was mostly dealt with the part of the floodplain that was already flooding before all this massive other stuff has been going on, just the natural floodplain. But it's going to be getting people to be willing to work together and share the power and think holistically before it's too late. I'm just still concerned about the timing, I guess. And who's going to make the decisions and how much citizen input they're going to really allow and how much they're really going to use the science. And the other thing I wanted to really quickly mention is you talk about the 2016 floods. I'm up on a 22-foot hill. I went to refinance my house and found out I had been remapped into the special flood hazard area, which is absolutely totally ridiculous. My house, I had to pay, our current parish president at the time was a surveyor, to get a LOMA for my house to show that it was 3 feet above the 19-foot BFE, which is absolutely ridiculous for this piece of property. So the floodplain, I'm one of the few people that didn't flood, that was mapped in the floodplain, as all these other people that were not in the floodplain had 3 feet of water in their house. So the maps are horribly wrong. So if we can get those updated, that would be a huge plus. And the parish refused to do anything to object to that update of the maps, which was basically just bad conversion of topo map lines to a digital GIS format. And just throwing some arbitrary number on the entire area that seemed to be based upon what was appropriate over by Bayou Manchac, but not for the rest of the parish. The floodplain, the floodwaters right now aren't even at 10 feet. They're probably close. Even in 2016, around my house, they were probably at about somewhere between 5 and 10. I'm well above it. I should not be in a special flood hazard area. So that's affected my property value. I was a smart person that bought up high, and other people who bought high who are being affected by these decisions that they didn't flood, but now they are. So what's going to happen for those of us that are stuck with that? How are we going to fix those maps and accurately portray them?
Yeah, which lends itself to emphasize again education, and we need a multi-tier level educational process around, you're saying the maps. Yes, that's one thing that's broken. I kind of have a similar story, not as smart as yours, but I think the people, we got to retool them and introduce different languages that educate about this the floodplain concept, the flood management concepts, and all of this stuff that people, and because now, and got to talk about skills, what different skills we need to be bringing to the table in government to help us manage this, because we're probably dealing with, so this is multi-layered and tiered, but at the same time, I think a big education campaign, start very basic and build, depending on your audience, and address, because I think oftentimes we make a lot of assumptions. But anyway, I know you want to recap. Sorry.
Thank you. No, that was y'all brought up some very good points that I had never thought of, especially the way that firms could change property values. And in that idea, there's winners and losers there. Does there have to be? I don't know. But that's a whole other kind of concept to think about. So we have like,
yeah, and it's important if the flood risk really has changed.
Yeah.
But in my case, it has not changed. So.
Yep. But and it even when it does, that when they go through that process.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. I got to stop in on a few of the conversations, and they sounded like they were really good conversations. I wish I could clone myself and listen to each one of them, to be honest. I know it's not possible, but they were really fantastic discussions. Thank y'all for showing up as you today and your multiple identities or selves, whatever you want to call it. It's much appreciated. We know that the week has been challenging, so I know that it was a lot to ask. So I know that we want to do a report out just so that folks can hear what other groups we're talking about. So I don't know if maybe we'll start with Anita, because y'all were group one, but Anita, you or designee from your group, what'd y'all talk about? Oh. And if you're talking, you are muted.
I gave the whole report. I was done.
Oh no, can you do it twice? I'm sorry.
Okay, so the group doesn't know this, but similar to yesterday, one of the themes that rose again was the Army Corps and how engaged the Army Corps is in the process and how critical that their engagement or coordination with them is going to be in the success of LWI. And so the thought that there are some already established processes that must be considered and incorporated into the planning and governance recommendations was a really big part of the conversation, that there's general agreement with the regional approach, but there's concern that there weren't enough traditional agencies at the table, i.e. levee boards and drainage districts, that they weren't at the table on the front end. And some may still not be at the table now to be able to weigh in on the governance recommendations and be able to talk through and deal with some of the challenges with jurisdiction and, just who has authority to do what, how much authority do they have statutorily, versus how much expected authority or entitled authority that they feel like, you know, they should have, or how much they feel like they should be engaged just out of, you know, I guess, professional courtesy. We talked a bit about at the end of the conversation about modeling and the reliance on the predictive nature of the models versus the need for the human experience and interpretation of those models. And finally, we basically wrapped up with jurisdictions. I covered that part already. So did I miss anything, my team? If I did, just jump in there, but I think that's pretty much it.
Okay.
One real quick thing, the comment about getting input from agricultural users, I think was a different and important element that was raised at the very end of our session.
Thank you for that. It was at the end and just wasn't in my head. So outreach to owners of agricultural land, especially in rural areas, on best management practices could be useful. So I want to quote that directly. Thank you for that, Jonathan. And thank you for that, Justin. Thank you for reminding me, Jonathan.
Perfect. Thanks, Jill. Again, a robust discussion I wish I could have listened to all of, but I know it's impossible. There's only one of me. So Drew's group, what did y'all talk about?
Thanks, Rachel, to take myself off mute there. So we had a sort of a ranging discussion in which we covered some of the questions. So I'm gonna try to break it down based on the questions. First, you know, what did our group like about what does it like about the watershed initiative and what opportunities we see? They were very excited that the state is engaging and looking at approaching these problems holistically and regionally. There was an expressed wish that we had done it sooner. Along with that wish is the concern that it might be too late to undo some of the things that have already been done. We're seeing opportunities to support strategic conservation efforts to allow sort of the nature in the area to do what it was designed, or not, nature isn't designed, but what it does, you know, allow swamps to hold water, that kind of thing. Opportunities to, as we're seeing citizens want to be engaged in this effort, opportunities to invite more young people and engage more young people, as well as opportunities to educate our elected officials and the business people, contractors, realtors, and developers. Opportunities to work with the climate change task force. Also, we talked a little bit towards the end about opportunities to update the firms through this process, the flood insurance rate maps. And then that we kind of talked a little bit towards the end, how that brings up, you know, sort of the concerns about once, you know, if the firm identifies someone's risk change, how does that affect the people that live there? Talking more about the concerns that were brought up. I mentioned that might be a little too late to undo some things. We're still pushing forth projects that are, you know, have been designed over 25 years ago. They're now just getting funding and dirt is turning on those, or getting about to be turned. As we talked about the opportunity to support conservation, there's concern that we're not talking enough about preserving the green space and habitat that we have. Concern that as everything is set up now and how we're talking about moving forward with the watershed initiative, that it won't actually be able to be implemented. Part of that concern stems from the fact that this is driven by an executive order. What will be there more long-term to sort of enshrine what is going on, this watershed initiative. And then concern that citizen input based upon some experiences that citizen input won't be taken into consideration. Concern that the science will not be utilized as it should be. Skipping down a little bit, what concerns do you have about management of stormwater in your city or in our parish? We talked a little bit about some unchecked development in areas that, maybe 40 years ago, the city or the parish had said, we're not gonna develop in these areas ever. Those areas are off limits. Well, today there's neighborhoods in those areas that's changed. So sort of the unchecked development there. And the feeling that the drainage patterns have changed. The way that water is behaving when it accumulates is not the same as it has been historically. And that's what I have for our group.
Is there anybody else from Drew's group who wants to add anything, or did Drew cover everything?
He did an excellent job.
As always, really glad to have Drew on the team. All right, and then last but certainly not least, Evelyn, for your group.
Thank you so much. Group 3 did an amazing job, I have to say. So thank you, Group 3. We shared a lot of common themes, I think, with groups 1 and 2. One of the themes I'm hearing is one thing that makes us all a little bit nervous is it can take a long time to make big changes. And so I hear some apprehension for sure that, this LWI program is a really good idea, but we're worried that it might be slow. And hurricane season's right around the corner. So I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind. We have got to move quickly. Also, some concerns with how do we get out of some of the old sort of paradigms of how we make decisions as a group of humans, right? Like, because we don't necessarily want everyone to come in, only thinking about their little, here's where I live and I don't care about anyone else. That's definitely not, I think, the dynamic that's going to serve to try to fight against the scale of the risk that we're really looking at in terms of the flood risk that we're facing in the future years. So we talked about, how do you find the right people to get in the room? How do you make sure that we're impartial? And how do we, work together, but also how do we think about, okay, what's good for all of us collectively, rather than just what's the thing that serves my politics or my location specifically. And definitely there is a dynamic that I'm hearing coming through where it's almost like a cycle that we were kind of describing, which is, if just normal people who don't have to think about, engineering water every day, if we can't all see where the water comes from and where it goes, some of that's hidden in pipes in the ground, then it's really hard for us to pass knowledge on to the next generation. It's hard for us to demand the right things from our local leaders. And then in turn, local leaders, if they don't feel the pressure to act in a certain way to really face the challenge, it's easy for them to maybe want to do the same old things. And, hey, we'll keep returning to the same solutions, and maybe they work a little bit, but not really put us in a position for a sustainable future. So those are definitely some concerns I'm hearing. And education was a through line through the whole conversation. Definitely just, this stuff is really complicated. Like, where water comes from, it's not like, a simple answer. In most cases, it's pretty complicated. So that's a hard thing to get around. And then let's see what else. So one of the things that I heard highlighted too is we talked about, like, what do we really want from our local entities like drainage boards and council And I heard a few things pretty clearly emerge, which is unbiased decision making, but also, you know, development standards, green infrastructure when it comes to projects. So those are some very specific demands that I think are very helpful. Consideration of cumulative development impacts makes perfect sense. That is a thing that's really hard to conceptualize, but really important to, you know, have in your regulatory regime. And then just, you know, let's not think about pumps as the only solution to everything. Like there's a lot of different ways to deal with water, and sometimes pumps are actually not the only thing that can solve a problem. And let's see what else. We also talked about how do we support groups that highlight information or issues with how our system works now, like nonprofit groups who are showing us, hey, this is where we have a problem in our water infrastructure, to again put pressure on those who may hold the purse strings and be able to fix those problems, or at least be able to come up with a direction to move in. Thanks, y'all. Do you have anything to add to that, group 3?
I'd just like to say that we need to strike when the iron is hot. Like right now, almost everybody's going to listen and take heed and learn. In the middle of a drought, it's not going to be quite the same. So, you know, take advantage of those times when people are ready to learn.
I agree. Of course, I said that in 2016, and we're still here. I said that in 83, we're still doing it.
Tried to click unmute 6 times and it was not unmuting. It's really fantastic discussions. Striking while the iron is hot. We are literally still in a flood event. I hear that loud and clear. And just again, thank y'all for your time and for being here. So closing out and next steps, I'll make this bigger so it's easier for everybody to see. We're going to have follow-up emails just thanking folks, letting people know where they can find this information online. We're going to post the notes. We're going to have the recording, and then how this information is going to be used. So to be very transparent, I have a pretty clunky spreadsheet that I have where I'm recording all of this feedback from every single conversation that we've had really since that provisional governance recommendation came out. And I'm trying to find some of the key themes that keep coming up over and over and over again, as well as some of the things that are outliers, but might still be really good suggestions that we've been hearing. So that's going to be incorporated into feedback that the steering committee is going to hear during our May meeting as well as our June meeting. So stay posted. I will put a link in the chat pod, so specifically this one, so you can register for that event with us. It is next week. Here we go. And just again, I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you for being here. It takes a lot more than lawyers. It takes more than scientists. It takes more than folks who are in academia. It takes more than folks who are planners. It takes people who are on the ground who have been experiencing the impacts of flooding and seeing and witnessing the changes over time to be able to tell those folks that I just listed what to do. How can we actually think about our efforts being supportive of what you've been witnessing on the ground, right? Because for all that we can say and see about modeling data and information, it's a prediction of the future. And sometimes the on the ground information is what tells us that we need to make adjustments to that, right? So just want to really say thank you. I really honor the fact that y'all are here today. I honor your presence. So thank you so very much. Many of you have my contact information. If you don't, then you'll get it in the follow-up email. So just know that you can reach out to me at any point in time. Stay safe out there. And I really, really hope that you'll have a fantastic weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.